Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our Redeemer Lutheran Church Bible study on the book of Ecclesiastes. I'm Pastor Eric Kleinschmidt from Redeemer Lutheran Church in Highland, Indiana. Glad to be back with you once again. I'll put the link to last week's Bible study on chapter 2 right up above for you to check out if you missed that one. And then you can even jump back to the first one if you wanted to start from the very beginning and then come back and find us here in chapter 3. I had some dental work done yesterday, so my jaw feels like it's out to my shoulders, but hopefully you can hear me and understand me. I may talk a little bit less, which may be an added blessing for you today. I don't know. Today we're talking about what is perhaps the most famous chapter in all of Ecclesiastes. It is that one which talks about it's a time for everything under the sun. And if you are really a music fan at all, you are probably aware of a certain song which actually quotes the first 8 verses of this book of Ecclesiastes. It was done by the Byrds in the 60s, and it was called Turn, Turn, Turn. Let me see if I can find it here for you. There it is. All right. So interestingly enough, this song, and I'm not sure if the record, but the song definitely was number 1 in the country for quite a while, and it holds the distinction in the United States as being the number 1 hit with the oldest lyrics, because the charts, whoever determines these things, it used to be Billboard, right? Billboard Top 40 or whatever, but whoever determines these things assume that the lyrics from the Byrds song are quoted from Solomon, who lived a long, long time ago. And so they actually credit the lyrics to King Solomon, and therefore the Byrds' Turn, Turn, Turn holds the distinction of having the number 1 hit with the oldest lyrics. So we were talking in the beginning of this Bible study that we're really not sure 100% who wrote Ecclesiastes, although Solomon is a number 1 contender, and I'm pretty sure about that distinction. But the Billboard charts, or whoever determines that, actually assume that Solomon wrote it and that the Byrds were covering King Solomon. So a little bit of music trivia for today. If you're hoping that I'm going to play this for you in the background while we talk about chapter 3, that's not going to happen. I find the tune a little bit annoying and pedantic, but that's my own musical taste. Not my favorite song in the world, even though it came out of the Bible. Sorry to confess that. Plus, also, I don't have the copyright to that, and if I put that on here, then my video gets flagged and all this sort of stuff happens, and we just don't want to deal with that. So if you want to listen to it, you're going to have to look it up on your own. All right? If you enjoy that song, God bless you. All right. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. It begins with the first 8 verses, which are an artistic poem. Okay, now there's different types of literature in the Bible. There's historical record, like we have in Kings and Chronicles. There's narrative, okay, that even Genesis just records things historically, but not always in a linear fashion. For instance, the first couple chapters are actually redundant. They tell the same story of the creation of humanity from 2 different angles, okay, to give us a fuller picture of what actually happened. So in that way, it's not just a set historical record of this happened, and that happened, and this happened, although that's part of what's in Genesis, of course. There's also wisdom literature. There's obviously hymns and poems and liturgical writing and music. There's apocalyptic literature, which deals with revelations of things that we have not understood yet and seen yet that are to come. Revelation is a good example, but it also occurs in places like Daniel. So there's a lot of different types of writing and literature in the Bible, different styles, and to understand what's being said, you have to take the style into account. It can't always be understood completely literally, although sometimes it has to be. And that's difficult, and where you come down on which way to understand it often determines your outlook or your worldview and how you view the scriptures. But these first 8 verses of Ecclesiastes 3 are definitely a poem. It's artistic, And as such, it is open to a myriad of interpretations. And there have been so many interpretations of Ecclesiastes 3 forever, as long as it's been written. And that's part of its art, and it's part of why Solomon wrote it that way. There's not just one understanding of what this means and how it applies. Rather, each individual is meant to come to this part and contemplate what's said and see how it applies in their own life. And that's going to be different. That's part of the joy of art, is that when there's something that is created artistically, there are really two different things that are at play. There's what the artist intends to convey, and then there's what the people who view it actually understand or interpret it as. Now, sometimes those things are one and the same, and that's what it's meant to do. Other times, it's a lot more nebulous or a lot grander. For instance, I don't care for modern art really at all. I find it rather confusing and boring. I'm just not that into it. But I did go to a modern art museum one time, and most everything didn't interest me. But the last room was a completely white room, and then on one wall, and it was a huge wall. It was a huge painting on this one wall. It was probably 12 feet tall by like 40 feet wide or something like that. It was humongous. I'm probably imagining that a little bit too big, but it covered the whole wall, and it was bigger than me, and it was just gigantic, and it was entirely black. It had texture, the way that it was painted, and some shades of black were blacker than others, that sort of thing. But it was an entirely black wall. And I thought, my first thought was, this is dumb. This is really dumb, right? But then as I stood there, because my group hadn't gotten to that room yet, they were taking more time than I was. I'm like, I want to get out of here. I started looking at it, and I swear that in this, it was like my eyes adjusted, and then in the black, I saw shadows within shadows. And to me, it looked like 3 crosses on a hill. And if I moved to one side, then it went away. But if standing right in front of it, looking straight on, it literally looked to me like 3 crosses on a hill. And to me, being who I am, that made a whole lot of sense, right? Because I'm thinking about, okay, when Jesus was crucified, there was darkness over the land for 3 hours, right? And I'm like, I wonder if that's what this is. And then another person came in, and they were like, I wonder what this looks like. And I asked them, well, what do you see? And they said something about the creation of the universe, that there was just black, but they can see the planets kind of coming together. And I tried to stand where they were and look at it, and I'm like, I don't see that at all. And I thought, well, that's interesting. At the end of it, I went and I looked at the little plaque that was there, and it gave the artist name and the medium and all of that. And then there was just a little notation that it said something like 3 p.m. darkness. Now, that is generally accepted as the time that Jesus died on the cross, okay, when darkness would have been over the face of the land. So I wonder if the artist intended that for that, and I wonder if I was right. But it's interesting that 2 people had entirely different interpretations. And if that's not what I was supposed to see, if that's not what's even there, it's interesting that my background helped me to read that into it, right? And that's part of what art does. Good art allows us to bring our own history and our own perceptions into something and take something away from it. And an artist may say, that's not what I intended at all, but good for you. An artist who says, no, you shouldn't have gotten that, you should understand it only in the way that I presented it, that's just pretentiousness and arrogance, and that's not real art, in my opinion. But who am I? So anyway, these sections in the wisdom literature, which are poetic and artistic, they are meant to convey not only the wisdom that Solomon has, but also to say, what did you get out of it? Sit and contemplate and see if you learn something about yourself through the contemplation of these verses. So that's what we're going to see. All right, let's look at the text. For everything, there is a season. Seasons are important because seasons come to an end. Okay? It's important to remember that whatever season you are in, whether it is a good season or a bad season, that it will change. Change is the constant. Okay, so right now it's fall here in Northwest Indiana. Actually, that's a lie. It's winter. I forget that it's January, and we haven't really had any snow, and it's almost 40 degrees today, and the grass is still greenish. So my Wisconsin mind looks at that and says, "Well, it's fall, right?" But no, we're in the heart of winter here. Again, perception. This gets kind of drab. It's gray sky today, and it's been gray for a while, and haven't really seen blue sky and sunshine. And I long for the spring, right? And what keeps you going is that you know it's coming. So seasons change and they come to an end. It's important to remember that whatever you're going through, it will change. Now, if you're going through a bad time, that's comforting because you know that things will eventually change and get better. If you're going through a good time, that's a little bit disconcerting because you don't want the good time to end. And yet that is the nature of life, that there's always change. So we need to come to terms with the fact that everything that we experience is not really permanent. So that's part of the wisdom of Solomon, simply in using that term season. Okay? There's also a time, that means appointed time, for every matter under heaven. And now we're going to talk about that. There's a time to be born and a time to die. Did you choose when you were born? No, you did not. Are you going to choose when you're going to die? No, you're not. Okay? I suppose unless you take your own life, but let's not talk about that, all right? Don't do that. You're too valuable to even consider that, okay? So just get that out of the way. Natural death, it could happen now. It could happen 50 years from now, for all you know. So God knows those things, and you are powerless in either way. So that's important to realize. There's a time to plant things and a time to pluck up what is planted. So sometimes you say, I'm going to invest and plan for the future in this place and to do this. And there's another time to say, you know what, this isn't working. I'm just going to pull the garden out and put it in a different spot. It doesn't get enough sun there. I didn't realize that. We're going to move it. Those realizations are important, that we should invest for the future, but also we should know when it's time to cut and run, apparently. A time to kill and a time to heal. It's important to note that Solomon here is reiterating the just killing that is allowed in the rest of scriptures. He's not talking about, hey, there's a time to go out and just massacre your neighbors, and a time not to. No, you're not supposed to do that at all. Thou shalt not kill. But as a king and as a ruler and as an administrator of the state and the sword that the state bears, which the Bible does permit and command, Solomon does have the right to end human life in certain situations. Now, we often talk about what are those situations and the just war criteria. Now, just war criteria is an entirely separate and expansive sort of discipline and philosophical endeavor. But for the sake of just understanding, we might say that the Bible allows capital punishment, the taking of life, for really three reasons. One is the protection of other people's lives, okay? So if you have a mad axe-wielding murderer running down the street, hacking up people left and right, you have the right as an established government to end that threat to other people by ending the madman's life, okay? And that's one of the reasons why we have police force that are armed, okay? We do not really believe in vigilante justice, although we will recognize that in some places it needed to be exempted. Happened right then and there because the police were still 5 minutes out and this needed to happen. And in those cases, we recognize that that person acted on behalf of society and therefore it was justified. So to protect innocent life. Number two, to punish evil. Okay. That's kind of goes hand in hand, that the madman, okay, he's doing something wrong, therefore there is a punishment, and that punishment is up to and including the loss and forfeiture of his own life. And one of the reasons why we would do that is for the third reason, and that is to serve as a warning, or rather to curb future crime. So you have somebody that commits something that is so atrocious that you want to scare other people from even considering that. And therefore, things like public execution of them, stoning in the Old Testament, and what we now have, the death penalty today, which is still fairly public, serves as a warning. Okay, those are really the three reasons why we would understand that it's justifiable to take human life. And it's important to understand that really lies within good established government. It's not the right of every individual to do that, although in certain situations we would recognize that, but there's usually an investigation from society into those situations. And so you have to be very, very careful with those sorts of things. But at the same time, just because the scriptures allow capital punishment does not mean that we have to exercise it in every case, okay? And it was actually a Martin Luther King Jr. It's the other Martin Luther that I don't normally talk about on this channel. I'm normally talking about Martin Luther, who lived in the 1500s, was a German monk, okay? Martin Luther King Jr. lived in the 1900s and was a civil rights leader. He was a Baptist pastor. His name was originally Michael King, all right? But we know him as Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. Wrote that one, I forget where he wrote it because I've read a lot of his stuff and it all kind of blends together in my mind. But he said that the measure of a society's maturity is how it treats the people that it doesn't have to be nice to. So people that have committed crimes that everybody agrees this person's life is worthless because of what they have done, a measure of how advanced of a society we are and how good of a people we are, it can be evidenced in how we treat that person. So maybe there's an argument about treating that person with mercy and with the hope of rehabilitation, even when they definitely don't deserve it. So to balance those things out in our cultural mind, I think, is important. But yes, God does allow the taking of human life by an established government for the good of society. And yet there is no command in the New Testament that we must take that person's life. So to balance those things out is part of an ongoing conversation. But it's important to realize that the Bible does allow for the death penalty, but we're also given the grace to say we don't always have to use it. So when he says a time to kill, he's talking about there is a time to end life, but there's also a time to try to heal what has been broken. A time to break down and a time to build up. I think we understand that. It's kind of the same as a time to plant and to pluck up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. What we talked about at the beginning, whatever season you're in right now, it's important to remember that it won't last forever, whether that's positive or negative. I found a lot of help comes from the understanding that what we feel will pass. So people are struggling a lot right now. It's no secret. I have the blessing and also the challenge of working with quite a few teenagers, and they are really struggling, especially after COVID, but just in society in general. It's a tumultuous time to begin with in life, and then we add all the pressures and what's going on in the world and what we've experienced the last couple of years onto it. It's just a lot. And so many of them are having real difficulty coping mentally with a lot of things. And one of the things I tell them most often, and I think they get some benefit from, is understanding that their feelings are like waves, that they come and then they go. And some waves are taller than others, and some are shallower. Sometimes the water is pretty smooth, and sometimes it's really rough, but that'll pass. And so when you're at the top of the wave and everything seems terrible and you don't think you can go on and you can't take it anymore, it's important to remember that soon that wave is going to crash and it's going to get better. There might be another wave right behind it, but you're going to have that up and down, and that's normal, and that's how we go through life. And if we understand that this will pass, it helps us get through it. And a lot of people that I have talked to have found real benefit in that. So I convey that to you. It's not my wisdom. It comes from, like Solomon, right? I think it's important to remember that what we're experiencing is a season. It's a wave, and that can help us get through it. A time to mourn and a time to dance. The height and the depth of human emotions is contained there. Verse 5, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. We might wonder, what does this have to do? Who gathers up rocks anymore, right? It's not just talking about skipping rocks at a pond here. This is talking about how war was conducted and what people at that time would have experienced. So in a time before you had concrete and mortar and stuff like that, a lot of times buildings were just built by gathering up rocks and fitting them together, and hopefully they would last. Well, what would happen if you were invaded is the invading force would come in and it would tear down your walls. It would literally just pick up the boulders and move them until there was nothing but a pile of rubble and rocks, okay? They didn't need bombs to blow up the walls. They just would pull rocks out until it fell down and then move on. And then when it was resettled, people would come in and they wouldn't bring their own materials from Home Depot. They would just gather up what was there and build on top of the ruins of a city. And this is all over the world. You'll see cities built on top of other cities, on top of other cities, with materials interspersed. And so sometimes it's hard to tell when something was built, but that's archaeology, and we see it over and over. Solomon here is talking that there's a time that we are destroyed, the castaway stones, and then there's a time when we are built up, when we are building up. And so, again, with the planting and plucking, and the themes here are kind of running all in parallel. The second half of verse 5, 5b, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. This word for embrace has several connotations. The first is what we would call a hug. There's a time to hug people and a time to refrain from embracing, talking specifically about what may happen in a family between parents and children, or children and their uncles, things like that, that you give them a hug. That's normal, okay? Friends, that's also included there. There's also the connotation in other parts of particularly Solomon's writing where we're talking about a marital embrace. And so we're definitely talking about sexual intercourse in that way. And it's included, in the wider understanding, obviously. Okay, so a husband and wife, they're going to hug each other, but they're also going to sleep together. Okay, so this word in Hebrew carries all of those connotations. And you can't really look at this verse and say, well, here it's this means this, but not that. Again, this is art, it's poetry, it's encompassing the whole of human relationships here, both marital and familial and also friends. The Greeks had multiple words for love, depending upon whether you were talking about a brotherly love or an intimate love, those sorts of things. Hebrew doesn't have that, but it does have words that encompass a lot of those meanings. It's part of the reason why you have so many different translations, English translations of the Hebrew. Hebrew is a poetic language to begin with. So they have words that mean a lot of different things, and how a translator determines what way to translate the word often can really skew the meaning. And that's why it's important to have translations that you can trust. But understanding that the reason why we have so many different English versions is often just because the lack of particularity in the original text of what this actually means. Are you talking about friends here, or are you talking about husband and wife? Well, particularly in verse 5 here, it would mean both. But in other places, it's kind of hard to figure that sort of thing out. Verse 6, a time to seek and a time to lose. Oh, I should go back. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. There's certainly times when you're going to be excited about seeing family members and friends. There's other times when you're having a fight with them and you're like, no, we got to figure this out before I'll give you a hug. In terms of marriage, the New Testament does talk about that there is definitely a time to abstain from sexual activity. Paul warns us that it should not be for a long time because sex inside of marriage is a beautiful thing and it's important for the relationship. And that means different things for different couples. There is no standard of how often that should be happening, that sort of thing. That's up to each couple. But it should not be a loveless union in that way. And certainly within marriage, it's permissible and it's beautiful. However, outside of marriage, it is restricted to complete abstinence. That's important to understand too. That's also a commandment. Verse 6, a time to seek and a time to lose. That's kind of sucks to understand that, you're going to lose some things, whether they're possessions or, people, honor. That's part of life. Sometimes you just lose things. Sometimes you seek them out. Sometimes you'll find them. Sometimes you won't. A time to keep and a time to cast away. Probably more than anything now, most of us need to cast away a little bit more stuff. Okay. Just a side note, moving to this area is a little bit different than where I grew up in northern Wisconsin, not just in terms of what the land looks like and how the people operate and this pace of life, but I grew up with, you put your car in the garage. That's what you do. When we moved into our street, we live at the end of a cul-de-sac, and some of our neighbors mentioned that they never thought we were home. I'm like, what do you mean? It's like, well, we never saw your car in the driveway. And I'm like, well, yeah, I come home and I put the cars in the garage. And they're like, both of them? I'm like, yeah, it's a 2-car garage. I have 2 cars. They go in the garage. For most of them, their garage was full of stuff. And so their cars are parked in the driveway. And I guess that's just a more common thing than I realized. But I think, okay, maybe it's time to and the people that mentioned that, I've seen their garage, they got stuff in there they don't need. I'm sorry, but I know they don't need it. They don't even know what they want to do with it. And they've even said, I don't need this. I don't know why I have it. I don't know why I'm keeping it. I need to get rid of it. Need to cast away. So yeah, we need to hoard a little bit less, okay? Take it as a call from Solomon. You need to go home and tell the missus or tell the mister, hey, Solomon told us we need to cast away a little bit more stuff and create some room. Usually what happens is the same thing that God did in the Old Testament. He sends a flood. So your basement is full of junk, and then you flood, and then you got rid of it, and you're like, hey, I guess we didn't need all that stuff to begin with, right? So sometimes a flood is a good thing, but I'm not going to pray for that. It's just maybe a time to cast away, people, all right? 7, a time to tear and a time to sow. Sometimes you have to break things off. You can't deal with that. You need to get away. Sometimes you need to tear yourself away from people, and there's time that you need to sew it back up very intentionally. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. That should speak to all of you Proverbs Bible study folks who so wonderfully trekked with me through the book of Proverbs. If you remember our remember points through the book of Proverbs, it was that we should speak truth, that you should speak less, and that you should mean what you say. Those are wisdom for about how men in particular are to act, but it's applicable to all people. And that's wisdom of Solomon in another place. And here he brings it out in verse 7 of Ecclesiastes, that there's a time to keep your peace, but there's also a time to speak up. And if you're going to speak up, you should mean what you say, and you should probably be speaking truth. So it all comes together. Another reason why I think Solomon wrote both Ecclesiastes and Proverbs. A time to love and a time to hate. Contrary to a lot of popular belief, the Bible does talk about hate as a permissible thing. It has to be for the right reasons. So there are many things that God hates, okay, that are set apart, that he does not condone, that he does not allow, and they're all sinful in that respect. And he calls upon his people to judge between what is good and what is wrong, okay? So the Bible does call us to judge, and the Bible does call us to hate that which is evil. We are not to hate people for no other reason than we dislike them. We can hate what they do. We can hate what we do, but we shouldn't hate them, and really we shouldn't hate ourselves either. So I know people that talk about, well, I won't use that word hate. Well, God does. So I guess you're better than God. Good for you. But no, there's a lot of things that I hate. Sometimes I hate righteously, and a lot of times I hate unrighteously, and that's cause for repentance and confession. But the Bible does talk about judging and does talk about hating certain things, but for the right reasons, and that's important. A time for war and a time for peace. Again, that goes back to our discussion about just war, about taking human life, that sort of thing. Understanding that sometimes it's necessary, and we can argue about whether World War II was necessary or Vietnam War was necessary. We can argue about that, I guess, but I can't come around and say that God doesn't allow for war at all, especially when you're trying to protect human life, but also that we should seek peace where it is possible. So that's the first section of this chapter of Ecclesiastes. Again, very artistic. There's a lot in the Hebrew grammar and the structure that we don't see here in English completely, although you can see that there's definitely a pattern as we've gone through. There's positive and negative, kind of opposites all paired together. There's other things with the words that are chosen that they have similarities that we're just not going to see in the English. Suffice to say that this is a very complex and artistically adept and beautiful part of writing on behalf of Solomon, and we shouldn't be surprised like that. David exhibited the same skills in the Psalms, and David, of course, was Solomon's father, so he passed on some of that ability to his son. All right, let's switch over to the middle section of Ecclesiastes, and we're going to see sort of a summary of what we just read and also return to the first two chapters. Solomon is going to reiterate things that he's talked about before. So he begins with verse 9. What gain has the worker from his toil? That's sort of a rhetorical question. And then he continues, I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. We talked about this, that in the Garden of Eden, God created human beings to work, and it was to be a joy. And we experience that sometimes in our job or with tasks that we get a sense of accomplishment from. But because of sin corrupts everything. That joy of work has been turned into toil, okay, or busyness. It doesn't seem to have any point. It's mundane, it's repetitive, it's tedious, it's pedantic. All of those sorts of things come together. We just want it over with. That's a result of sin. And we can see that in our own lives. There are things that we enjoy doing, and we say, if I could do this every day, I'd love to go to work. But that's not what we do most of the time, right? Most of the time we're doing the things that we don't enjoy, and that's why people pay us to be there, because we wouldn't be there on our choice, right? So Solomon is reiterating what he has said before, and this busyness comes as a result of the fall into sin. But then there's a positive, whereas in the previous chapters, we didn't see that. We had to read into it and be between the lines to get the positive of what Solomon was saying. Here in verse 11, he is going to say it outright. God, he, has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart. So everything is beautiful in its time. This is where we come to one of our remember points here for Ecclesiastes, that we should take life as it comes and enjoy God's good gifts while they're in front of us, right? Don't always be pining away for what's next or something else or what used to be. Just be in the moment and appreciate what you have, okay? So God has made everything beautiful in its time, but remember, it's just a season. So we are to take life as it comes and try to find what's beautiful in that moment and in that task. Okay, that's probably a key to lifelong peace and contentment. I'm not saying to say happiness, I say contentment, because contentment is different than happiness, and contentment is better than happiness, as joy is better than happiness. So if we're going to seek those things, the best thing is to look at what we're dealing with right now and try to find the joy in it, because God has made it beautiful in His time. God has also put eternity in our hearts. Now, that means several different things here in Ecclesiastes. It's talking about that we have a knowledge of God's wisdom, that there is something bigger than us, namely that there's such things as justice, right, wrong, mercy. Those are things that evolution can't explain as to why we have these things as human beings. Your dog isn't concerned about the righteousness of going out and peeing on the lawn, okay? Doesn't contemplate that. All right, it's an animal that's reacting to a bodily biological function, okay? However, we contemplate things like ethics and mercy, and we think about revenge and whether it's justified or not. Lions that are eating their children, their young, are not thinking about that, okay? So we are different than beasts. That's part of what God has written on our hearts, the law, his wisdom. Also, we understand that there has to be something more after this. So there's an eternity that says there's got to be more to life than just this. And we have that. And yet, as Solomon says, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. So we have a sense that there is more beyond ourselves, but we don't fully understand it, is what Solomon is saying. And that's one of the reasons why having a God who cares about us is so comforting. I have a God who understands what I don't and also cares about me enough to say, I'm working all that out for your benefit. Don't worry, let me do it. I mentioned this to my confirmation kids last night, that sometimes you have to trust your parents. And they said, oh yeah, that's hard because sometimes I think they're wrong, that they don't understand. But in the end, I find out that, no, they really were right. And so we're the same way with our Heavenly Father. Verse 12, I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. So if you need a thing of what should I do today, it's take life as it comes, find joy in it, and do good where you can. That is enough to keep everyone busy every day from the time that they're born to the time that they die. So if you're looking for some life plan, how about that? Take life as it comes, find joy in what's in front of you, and try to do good. That message, however, can be given to you as easily from somebody who doesn't believe in God as somebody like me who says that. I would add that the reason you can do these things with a clear conscience and have peace is because you know that there's more life to come, that God has it all figured out. So there's more than just do good and be nice, which is the secular world's mantra right now. There's no purpose for it. Like, who cares? How are you going to be judged? You're going to be judged by what? Public opinion? Well, people don't care about that anymore. They're not worried about, what do people think, because they have an echo chamber that's telling them that they're the best and that everything that they do is right. So if there's nobody to answer to at the end, then who cares what you do now? Take what you can get. And the message of the world is kind of contradictory. It says, because it says the whole purpose to life is to consume, copulate, and then die. But then it also tells you that, you should be nice to people. Well, why? Because if I'm just an animal, the survival of the species depends upon me being violent and selfish, because that's the animal kingdom. That's how you pass on your genetic material for the next generation, but you're not going to be around, so who cares, really? But that's what your biological imperative is, to further the species, which is another kind of argument for at least there being a God who put that there, because otherwise, why do we even have that survival instinct? Where did that come from? How did that evolve? Can't answer that question scientifically, so it's just out there. Anyway, I'm getting off topic here. So if we're looking for like a pattern for life, because we have a God who's handling things that we don't have to worry about, we can just focus on the here and now, take life as it comes, find joy in it somewhere, focus on those things, and try to do good to others so that they might have some joy in life too. That's enough to keep the children of God busy until Jesus comes back. So wisdom from Solomon given for you today. Also, verse 13, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. Find those things that make you happy in life. But remember that God commands certain things. Just because it makes you feel good in the moment doesn't mean that it's good for you. That's something our society just can't figure out right now either. But God has figured that out for us, and that's why he gives us the commandments. So within God's commandments, find what makes you happy. Eat, drink, and enjoy it. That's God's gift to man, that life is hard and life sucks sometimes, but God has put in there these little gems that just make it a glimpse of that there's better to come, and God like litters them out through the muck until you get through the muck and you wind up in the promised land, kind of a thing. So I mentioned that I love just regular Coca-Cola. It just makes me happy. And I don't drink it all that often, every day. It's bad for me and all that sort of stuff. So it becomes a treat. And some days I'm like, there is nothing good about today. I'll stop at the gas station and I'll just get a can of Coke, and I'll at least enjoy that. And that's been beneficial to me. So find those things and cultivate gladness and joy if you have to. All right? Verse 14, I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nothing taken from it. God is different than you are, right? He's doing his things and he doesn't really, need your input or your permission. He's going to do them and they're going to last forever because he's God. God has done it so that people fear before him. Fear does not mean be frightened and afraid and terrified, cowering in a corner. That is an aspect of godly fear. Because God is almighty and he is wrathful over sin. So we should fear his wrath in that respect because it can be frightening. But godly fear really refers to a healthy respect and an honoring of God. So if I have a mentor who I appreciate his opinion, I am going to speak about him in a certain way. I'm going to address him in a certain way. I am going to interact with him in a certain way that conveys that respect that I have. And if I'm going to disagree with what he says or what he wants me to do, I would do so sort of timidly, and learning how to do that respectfully but also assertively is an art form. So that's how we interact with God, that I'm not afraid that God is going to smite me. No, I have a love for God that I want to do things correctly, yet I understand my own limitations and my own weakness, and there's times where I'm angry with God and I want to express that to him, and he invites us to do that. David does that too, but I need to do so in a manner that conveys my admiration and my respect as well, and that's part of godly fear. So when you read fear in the Bible in these places and in the understanding of the commandments, understand that as a healthy respect for, not watching a scary movie type of fear, okay? Verse 15, that which is already has been, that which is to be already has been, and God seeks what has been driven away. All right. Time is something that God created in the first 6 days of creation. The succession of one thing, one moment after another, is not how God exists. That is our understanding of existence. We know of no other pattern for life and being other than one moment follows after another. So a linear progression of time. God exists outside of that existence and that linear progression of time. For him, there really is no such thing as yesterday or tomorrow, because those are concepts of time and the passage of time. These are why in the Bible there's those passages like a day is 1,000 years to God, 1,000 years is a day. It doesn't mean that God is just slow and or time passes faster for him. It means that he's outside of that reckoning. So our understanding of one event happening after another is really, I would say, probably not how God understands and experiences everything. Instead, he just fills all things, is all things, always has been. That's why his divine name, the name he reveals to Moses, isn't I've been around for a long time or I always will be. It's simply I am. I just am. There is nothing else than that. I just am. Okay, so that's what Yahweh in the Old Testament actually means, God's personal name and who he is. So when we're talking about like how can Jesus exist from all eternity, but he's not born until 1 AD, then if what did he have a body? What did he look like before he was born of Mary? Those sorts of things. We're trying to take God, who fills all things and is eternal, and put him into a linear progression of time. And it doesn't work, which is why it's so confusing to us. The funny thing is that astrophysics kind of like bears some of this stuff out. So as we understand the E equals mc squared, like relativity, time and space, time and matter are really the one and the same. So if you distort the space around something, it also distorts time. And we've proven this even on Earth, where you can take two watches. Okay, you keep one here on the planet surface, and then you put one in a plane and you fly it around the world. Time will pass differently for them. Look it up, okay? It's weird, but okay? So that's where we get the understanding that as you go into a black hole, time slows down and eventually stops. That's all from that theory of relativity, okay? And I don't fully understand that. I've tried, I've done some research, but I'm not an expert in that, but I understand that much. So we have an understanding that time isn't constant, that time fluctuates. And so it fluctuates like weather, it fluctuates like all kinds of different things. It's not as constant as we think it is. And so it's evidence that it's created. God exists outside of that. So I know that blows your mind, at least it should, because it blows mine. And it's hard to understand. But when Solomon talks about that which is already has been, that which is to be already has been, that's God's experience of everything. There's nothing new under the sun for him. He's got it all under control. He's seen it all. He's done it all. He knows it all. He's working it all out. God seeks what has been driven away. God concerns himself with that which is lost. That we see throughout the New Testament too. God cares about the downtrodden, the cast aside, more than anybody or anything else. Does he love all people? Sure he does. But who does he love the most? Little children, widows, and orphans. Yep. Who does Jesus seek out? The destitute in society. He heals lepers, right? He hangs out with tax collectors, sinners, prostitutes, Samaritans. It's all through the Bible. God loves everybody, but he cares and he shows his mercy most to the people that are the lowest of the low. So as you think about your own life and how you deal with people, think about how God views them, right? As the higher they are, the less concern that God really has for them. He loves them, sure, but the lower they are, the more God wants to exalt them. Kind of strange. God is upside down from our perception of things. Another reason we don't really belong here. So now we've come to the third and last section of Ecclesiastes 3, and it's going to bleed into the next chapter. We're going to be talking about the reality of life in this world. All right? And I really don't like the colloquialism of "it is what it is," right? I try not to use it because I just kind of grates on my ears when I hear people say it, and yet it's so true that we all wind up saying it at some point, right? The point of Ecclesiastes, in general, we might say, is life is a certain way. Your only option is to deal with it. And the world doesn't give you a good enough answer as to how you should deal with it. That answer has to come from outside. Wisdom from on high. God will give you that answer. Okay? And that's what Solomon is concerned with, is sussing out that answer. And what he finds is he's already been given it. Right? Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Right? Trusting in the Lord, doing things God's way, living as if God matters is the utmost concern, more than anything else he experienced in all of his kingship. So he's got that down, and that's what Proverbs taught you. Now it's going to be, what can you do from day to day? Like, you have this overarching plan, I'm just going to live for God. Now, what else is there? What more is there? And what he's saying is, God has also given you the gift of enjoying what's right in front of you and finding that joy in those little small nuggets of happiness here and there, but always realizing that the full happiness and the full joy is yet to come, that you are in the waiting room for real life. And this waiting room is awesome and it's great and it's got good things in it, but it's not really where we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be the party on the other side of the door. It's going to be even more great than this. Okay. So Solomon gives us those two things in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. And now we're going to say, let's look at the way life is and see what is behind it. Here we're probably going to have to read between the lines and look behind it to see what he's really saying, like we had to do in the previous two chapters. Verse 16. Moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, where everything should be right and good, even there was wickedness. And in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. Do righteous and good people sin? Yes. Do institutions that concern themselves with the health and welfare and godly things, do they have corruption? Yes. Does that mean government? Yes. Does that mean police? Yes. Does that mean the church? Yes. Does that mean the family? Yes. Sin infects all of it, corrupts all of it. Does that mean that the institutions and the people are worthless? No. It means that we have to judge between what is good and what is evil, what is right and what is wrong. God calls us to do that. But we shouldn't expect that our institutions and our authority figures be perfect in a sinful and imperfect world. We just have to deal with that fact. It's the reality, okay? God will set things right when he comes again, but until then, we just have to deal with reality. Verse 17, I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked. So even if we can't judge it and can't punish it, God will suss it all out in the end. For there is a time for every matter and for every work. God is working through all of it. He's reiterating what he set up in the first part of this chapter. There's a time for everything under heaven. You can go back to the birds again. If you want to replay it, go ahead and replay it, or you can sing along while I write this. I said in my heart with regard to the children of man that God is testing them, that they may see that they themselves are but beasts. God allows bad things to happen, even to good people, to teach and discipline, for God disciplines those that he loves. If we just had a perfect and easy life, we wouldn't find any need for God. We wouldn't contemplate our own mortality if we didn't get sick from time to time. COVID was great for that, because a lot of us forgot how fragile and temporal we are. We just always assume that there's always another day, there's always another year. At least those of us who aren't in our 90s, right? We assume that we have this much time left, but you don't know that. And God can show you that evidence again and again. You can read the obituaries over and over and see people your own age dropping dead. But you can still think, oh, that's not me. But when we are afflicted, then we start to contemplate those things. So that's a good thing, that God wants us to keep focused on what matters. Don't get your eyes set on the things of this world, because this is only the waiting room. Think about what is yet to come. Seek first his kingdom. Fix your heart on things above, where moth and rust do not destroy. All of that, all right? While you're doing that, it's okay to enjoy the things that are right in front of you. That's how we live, with our eyes to the future for eternity, but also appreciating the gifts of God in the here and now. That's a structure for a peaceful life. That's what Ecclesiastes delivers. It's beautiful in that way. Solomon, he isn't saying that we're evolved from monkeys here. What he's saying is, for what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beast is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. We can look at nature around us and find out that we're not eternal to live on this planet. Everything around us is in decay and death. We see it around. It's all meant to remind us that these are the consequences of sin. Therefore, we need someone to deal with our sin. Jesus is that someone. He has dealt with it on the cross. It's finished. Therefore, you can sit back and watch the world die and go, well, I guess that's the way it's supposed to be. But hey, there's still Coca-Cola, so that's pretty cool. And then you die, and then you go to heaven, and then Christ comes again and creates a new heaven and a new earth that's perfect and doesn't have the effects of sin and death, and you live there forever. That's awesome. Not there yet, but I look forward to that. So until I'm there, I'm going to enjoy the things that God puts in front of me. That's the message of Ecclesiastes. You're watching the world burn, but it's okay. There's Coca-Cola, and there's an entire life that's after this that's perfect. That's my summary of Ecclesiastes. Put that on the cover. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beasts, for all is vanity, chasing after the wind. Really, although we're not evolved from animals, our existence is kind of the same. We eat and we have families and we inhabit the place, but then we're gone, right? And Solomon's between the lines is, there's something after this. Pay attention to what comes after. All go to one place, all from dust to dust, all return. Who knows? It's Genesis again. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down into the earth? Like, we don't know what happens to all these sorts of things. And yet God does. God has got it all sorted out. Again, there's a whole bunch of stuff we don't know, and we won't ever know. There's only one guy that's gone through death and come back to tell us about it. And what does he say? He tells us precious little about the whole process. Instead, what he says about the whole death process is, well, it's kind of like sleeping, because you're going to fall asleep and you're tired, but then you're going to awake and you're going to be fine. You will be like me as I am. And because I live, you shall live also. And we will spend eternity together. So that's all Jesus really says about the whole process of death and coming back from death. Lazarus doesn't say anything about it. The widow's son that Elijah raised doesn't say anything about it. Is it Jairus' daughter doesn't say anything about it. In fact, Jesus says, she's just sleeping. Jesus calls death sleep because he knows you're going to wake up. He doesn't tell us anything about the process other than, hey, trust me, because I live, you will live also. Don't worry about it. You pass from death to life. That's it. We are so concerned about it, and yet it's such a side note in Jesus' existence that he's like, it's not even worth telling you about. Don't worry about it. It's finished. Because I live, you live also. Yeah. It's like falling asleep, he says. You wake up again and won't think anything of it. Verse 22. So I saw that there is, here we have the end. Going back to the theme, right at verse 13, which is kind of there right in the middle. All right. Everyone should eat, drink, take pleasures, toil, let God give to man. Here at 22. So I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? God can. So, as we look at this, understand that there is an existence after this one that's eternal, and it's better than what we have here. We should keep our eyes on that prize and live for that existence. We get there only through Jesus Christ. So believe in Jesus is the key to that existence. That being settled, that being finished, what do we do between now and then? Well, we let God be God. We take life as it comes, whatever we're dealing with today. We handle it. We find joy in it. Try to find joy in it. And then at night, we go to sleep and let God do his work. And the next day, we do it all over again. So, if we're going to have wisdom from Ecclesiastes, it's the world is rough. It might even be burning all around you, but there's still things to be joyful about that God has given you as foretastes of the feast to come. There is another life on the other side of the waiting room door. Live for that life. Until then, enjoy and find those things to be happy about here and now, and just let God worry about everything else. That's Ecclesiastes. That's the wisdom of Solomon here in chapter 3. And I hope it gives you some guidance, some peace, some tranquility, something for today. God loves you. He's taking care of everything. Believe in Jesus. I will see you on the other side of the waiting room door someday, all right? And we will exist forever in joy and happiness and not have to try to search and find out something to be happy about each and every day. What a beautiful existence that is going to be. And that's the hope that all Christians have, and that's what guides us through this life that sometimes sucks, okay? There. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope if you like the birds, you're still singing the bird song. If not, like me, you're going to try to be getting it out of your head all day. But that's fine. God willing, I will see you next Wednesday. God bless you all and take care.